Everybody knows what a Viking looks like. Archaeologists have dug up Viking settlements, Viking graves, Viking ships, and Viking helmets for 200 years across half of Europe. They have never found a single horned helmet, not one. The horns come from a costume designer working on an opera in 1876. And that's the pattern here. Almost none of the things people believe about history came from historians. They came from someone with a show to sell. Here are 6 of them. Real Viking helmets are dull, rounded iron caps, sometimes with a nose guard, practical, cheap, forgettable, and there's a good reason there are no horns on them. In a fight, horns are handles. They catch weapons, they catch branches, they let somebody turn your head for you. Nobody who has ever actually been hit wants them. There is one honest complication, and it's worth saying, because otherwise the comments will say it for me. Horned helmets do exist in Scandinavia from the Bronze Age. Roughly 1800 years before the Viking Age, and almost certainly ceremonial rather than worn into battle. That's a bigger gap than the one between us and the Roman Empire. Nobody in a longship had ever seen one. So where did the image come from? In 1876 in Germany, Richard Wagner staged the first complete performance of his 4-opera cycle about Norse gods and heroes. It was the cultural event of the decade. Everyone who mattered in Europe was there. The costumes were designed by a man named Carl Emil Doppler, and he needed the northern characters to look immediately visibly barbaric from the back of a very large theater, so he gave them horns. That's it. That's the whole origin. Within a generation, the horns were on book covers, in paintings, in advertising. A century later, they were on sports teams and cereal boxes and Halloween costumes. An opera costume beat 200 years of archaeology, and it wasn't close. Napoleon was not short. He was somewhere around 5'7", which was normal to slightly above average for a Frenchman of his time, and taller than a lot of the men he commanded. 2 things went wrong. The first is a units problem. His height was recorded in French measurement as about 5'2", but the French inch was longer than the English one. Copied across without converting, 5'2" sounds tiny. Converted properly, it's 5'7", same man, same body. 2 different rulers. The second is that Britain was at war with him, and Britain had James Gillray. Gillray was the most popular political cartoonist in the country, and for years he drew Napoleon as a screaming, stamping little man, tiny in a big hat, tiny on a big horse, tiny beside British figures. It was funny, it sold, and it was printed constantly. It also helped that his personal guard were chosen partly for being enormous. Every time he stood with them in public, he looked small in the middle of them. So the Emperor of France spent his life being drawn as a furious small man by an enemy doing it deliberately, and the enemy won. There is a psychological condition named after him. It is named after a joke a cartoonist made 200 years ago about a man of average height. Those 2 are harmless, a helmet and a height. The next one isn't, because the next one wasn't a mistake that spread. It was written on purpose by someone who wanted a particular story to be true, and it changed how millions of people understand an entire 1,000-year period. Here's the scene most people were taught. Columbus goes to the Spanish court and asks for ships. The learned men tell him the earth is flat and he'll sail off the edge. He insists it's round. He sails anyway and proves them wrong. Almost none of that happened. Educated Europeans knew the earth was a sphere. They had known since the ancient Greeks, who had not only worked out that it was round, but had calculated its size to a remarkably good approximation, well over 1,000 years earlier. Medieval scholars taught it. Medieval kings are painted holding a globe. Nobody at that court thought the world was flat. The argument was about something else entirely, and it's much better. The dispute was over how big the earth is. Columbus had done his own arithmetic, and he had it badly wrong. He thought the planet was far smaller than it is, and that Asia was therefore reachable by sailing west with the supplies a ship could carry. The scholars who examined his proposal said the distance was much greater than he claimed, and that he and his crews would die out there before reaching land. They were right. He was wrong. He would have died, except that there happened to be 2 enormous continents in the way that nobody on either side of the argument knew about. So where does the flat Earth version come from? Largely from a book published in 1828 by the American writer Washington Irving, the man who wrote Rip Van Winkle. He wrote a biography of Columbus and, being a novelist, he added scenes, including that one. But a made-up scene in one book doesn't become something every child is taught. Plenty of invented scenes die quietly. This one survived because it was useful. Later in that century, there was a loud public argument going on about religion and science, and one side wanted examples of the church holding back knowledge. Irving had handed them a perfect one. A room full of churchmen insisting on something absurd while a lone man says the obvious. It got repeated in essays, in lectures, in textbooks for 100 years, by people who needed it to be true. That's the part worth remembering. The story didn't spread because anyone checked it. It spread because somebody had a use for it. And it turned a man who was badly wrong about geography into a symbol of being right. 3 quick ones. Nobody was burned at Salem. The witch trials are the most famous in the English-speaking world, and the image is always a stake and a fire. 19 people were hanged. One man, Giles Corey, was crushed to death under stones for refusing to enter a plea. Nobody was burned. Burning was a European practice, mostly for heresy. Salem was under English law, and English law hanged you. The fire got attached later, because fire is what a witch trial looks like in a painting. Next, you cannot see the Great Wall of China from space with your naked eye. It's long, but it's narrow, a few meters wide, in colors that match the ground it's built from. Astronauts have said repeatedly that they couldn't pick it out. China's first astronaut looked for it and said the same thing. And here's the giveaway. The claim is older than spaceflight. People were printing it in the 1700s, and it reached a mass audience through a popular newspaper feature in the 1930s, decades before anyone had been up there to check. It was never an observation. It was a guess that sounded good. Last one. Einstein did not fail mathematics. He was near the top of his class in maths and physics, and had worked through calculus by around 15. The myth seems to come from a Swiss school grading scale that runs 1 to 6, where 6 is the best mark. Read it as an American report card, and a row of 6s looks catastrophic. He did fail an entrance exam at 16, and that part is true. He failed the general subjects, passed the science, and was 2 years younger than the students sitting it with him. Which is a much better story than the one everyone tells. And nobody tells it. There's one thing all 6 have in common. The false version is always the better story. Horns look more dangerous than an iron cap. A furious little man is funnier than an average-sized one. A lone genius against a room of fools is a better scene than a committee being correct about arithmetic. Fire is more dramatic than a rope. And a good story moves. It gets printed, drawn, filmed, retold, put on a lunchbox, especially when somebody has a use for it. A correction does none of that. A correction is a footnote somebody has to go and look for. Nobody was lied to on purpose. Entertainment is simply faster than accuracy, and it always has been. Which means the honest thing to say at the end of a video like this is the obvious one. Some of what you just heard will be revised, historians argue, evidence turns up, and a few of these will look different in 50 years. That isn't a weakness in history. That's what history is. And if you want to see this happen to an entire era at once, a whole period of history invented by people selling tickets while it was still going on, that one's on the screen now.